Okay, a few more words about the coding frame or the code list. And there are 4 different terms used here, and I'm using them interchangeably and not making a big distinction between them. Obviously, template analysis talks about the template, that is a coding list or a coding frame, coding scheme. The term coding frame is sometimes used in quantitative work as well, so that's slightly confusing, but nevertheless, people use these terms without realising interchangeably. It's worth mentioning. Okay, a list of codes with definitions. So the temptation is just have a list of codes, but you should also try and get a definition with each one. Some short set of terms, sentences, phrases that indicates to you, so you can remember the next time you sit down with the data what you meant by that code. The name itself can be illustrative, can be very useful. I've just used that in the diagram I just showed you. But actually, a definition that goes with that is more useful. Keep that obviously separate from the document, so the coding frame, the coding list is separate along with the definitions. It's not the same as a document. So you should have a list that's kept separate from the actual transcripts, original documents. And a key point here is that list can be hierarchical. Again, if you've done template analysis, you'll know that accepts hierarchical lists of themes, of codes. And the idea is to use this to apply the coding in a systematic and consistent fashion, hence the definitions. And the other thing is, bear in mind, we're talking very much about you're working on your own at the moment, but this might be something which you're doing in a team, and of course, if you're coding a piece of text with others, then sharing the codes, or sharing the definitions of codes is quite important. So that's where these definitions are becoming particularly important if you're working with other researchers who need to code things in a similar fashion. And this is typically the kind of things a code definition might include. And obviously the name of the researcher. If you're working in a group, then that's where it's useful to know which person decided on this code. If it's just you, it doesn't really matter. The date when you did it, or when you changed the coding, and of course the definition, the analytic idea, that's the bulk of it. That's the narrative that's telling you what the code is about. And you might put other notes there about it as well, how it relates to other codes, and perhaps even ideas for analysis, things that you might do with it that you can jot on. It's kind of memoing the codes. Just an example of a hierarchy. Here's a list of codes about friendship. I just made these up. Imagine you're doing a piece of research and interviewing people about what friends they have and how they treat them and so on. And here's some of the issues they talk about. Well, could we rearrange those into hierarchy? I think we can, because here's the same set of codes rearranged into a hierarchy. And I've obviously introduced some new labels here, the ones that come at the top here. So I've divided it into friendship types in a set here. And I said of these there are 3 friendship types: close, generalised, sporting and work. Of course, these aren't all the friendship types there could possibly be, they just happen to be the ones that came out of the research that this refers to. And the sporting types can be of 2 kinds, club and non-club. Now, one thing to point out while I show you this is that actually rearranging codes into hierarchy like this can be very useful for finding gaps. And you might say, it's not entirely obvious here, but under sporting, you might have some reference to club. And immediately, having got that, you think, well, I ought to have a reference to non-club sporting friendships as well. People who have sporting friends, not because they're a member of a club, but in some other way. So I may play tennis with other people at my tennis club, but I also play tennis with other people who aren't in my tennis club. So they're non-club. So by beginning to organise this, you suddenly realise there should perhaps be other codes that you perhaps not either so far not come across, or that might be generated. Now this, of course, there are just 2 kinds here, but you might find that your subcodes, quite a list, and you'll see some of the data we look at later on in Vivo. Quite a lot of codes in the subcode area, different kinds and ways of doing things. But it's a way of identifying gaps in that. Okay, so that's what a hierarchy looks like. And again, typically that's used by things like template analysis and so on, framework analysis, but also programs like NVivo will implement that. Okay, I said I'd come back to this as well later on. Big or small chunks. When you're coding text, should you use large chunks of text? And in the old days, before we had computers, people often identified whole paragraphs, maybe even whole pages of text with one code. And that went in the envelope or in the file. It's only more recently we've been thinking about coding these words on their own. Because a word on its own means nothing when you cut it out. You just put it into a pile, into the thing without the context. So, what are the pros and cons? First of all, the wide, the large sections of text here. The advantage is you're maximising the usefulness of the code. It's easy to get the context from it because you can see it. Often the passage is long enough to see the context itself. I should say that one of the problems here is decontextualisation. When you code things, you often remove what you've coded from its context, and the recontextualisation can be quite difficult. The longer passages, that avoids it. The cons are that it's obviously harder to find. I mean, if you've got long passages, is this passage about so-and-so? It's hard to make decisions about long passages, because actually, in a long passage, people talk about lots of different things. So you've got a question about where does it start, where does it end, how much of this actually is about this idea or not. It makes it harder to do that. And the coding, therefore, becomes slightly vaguer. On the other hand, if you have narrow or short passages, just phrases perhaps, or sentences that you're coding, that enables you to have greater differentiation. You can be more specific. This is just about this, because only these words actually are included in code. And it's easier to identify those sections. But you're losing your contextual data. So when you retrieve that data, it's hard to know what went on before and after, because you can't see just a few words. And you lose meaning. And the other thing is you may end up with too many codes. You're identifying too small a section of code, you end up with lots of codes, and it's very hard to manage those. So having short text passages coded is often a recipe for a large number